Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kayla and it's time to crack into a good book. So today's video is going to be another recent reads wrap up, and this is books 6 through 15 I think that I read in October. So this is actually like a really generally positive wrap up, so that's nice, you know, having lots of exciting books. We'll go ahead and get started, and like always we'll work our way up from the lowest rated to the highest rated books. So I have one 3-star book to talk to you about today, and that's The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. So this is a YA thriller where our main character Avery unexpectedly inherits this fortune from a billionaire, even though she has no clue why or who this dude is. She has to move into this mansion full of puzzles and also his family that he just disinherited. So there's 4 brothers. One thinks she's a con woman, another thinks that she's a puzzle to be solved. So Avery essentially has to play this game to survive. So I think that this was decent overall. It's pitched as being like Knives Out, and you know, to some extent I can see these similarities here, but I really just wanted more puzzles, and I think that was like the biggest drawback that I had in enjoying this book. It's very quick to read and mostly interesting. However, there are 2 love triangles here that were a bit annoying to me. I felt like these were just unnecessary. I just would have preferred these to not have been there at all. The puzzle parts and, you know, just like trying to solve things, those were super interesting, especially the ending. So I just kind of wanted this more consistently throughout the book. I got really annoyed by just like consistently calling the boys by their full names often. Like, there's a purpose to it, but it just like really got on my nerves for some reason, just like constantly having to read their full names over and over again. But you know, aside from that, I think Avery was generally pretty likable. She's understandably overwhelmed by this inheritance. I liked how clever she is, and she does seem to be a nice person and just want to help others overall. The brothers were kind of meh to me, and most of them were exchangeable. Like, I did keep confusing them, which is not great. Some of the other family members that we encounter here are also kind of not great people. Avery, I think, does make some dumb and just kind of like ill-advised decisions, so that was like a little bit frustrating. But, you know, in general, yeah, like I didn't fully love any of the characters, I think. I am a little bit conflicted about continuing this. Like I said, the ending was really good, but I don't think that this is the best Jennifer Lynn Barnes book that I've read so far. Like, I much prefer her Natural series and The Lovely and the Lost, which I just recently read. I'll probably wait until, you know, like whenever the next book comes out, which who knows when that'll be, but I'll probably wait and try to like read some reviews first to see if it's worth continuing for me. So, you know, this is kind of the middle of the road. If, you know, like, I love the comparison with Knives Out and everything. Like, Knives Out is such a good movie, but you know, for me, I just don't think that the book fully lived up to this comparison. So I have one 3.5-star book to talk to you about today, and that's Incendiary by Zoraida Cordova. So this is a YA fantasy, and we read this for the Space Sirens book choice to discuss in early November. So that'll be, I think we're doing that next weekend. I think the weekend of November 7th and 8th. That's when we'll do the live show if you're interested in watching that. So this is a book that's inspired by the Spanish Inquisition. We have our main character, Renata, who has this magical ability to steal memories. So she was kidnapped as a child to basically serve the king, but now she's a rebel spy. But she's not really trusted by the rebellion based on her past. So her commander of this unit that she's in is taken captive, and Ren tries to rescue him, and essentially has to go undercover and like starts to remember her past. So generally I thought that this was enjoyable, but I just didn't love it as much as I hoped to, unfortunately. I do think it is fairly dark for YA. We do have some kind of darker content like torture and things like that, so I did appreciate this and just like the general tone. I did feel like it was more unique for YA fantasy, but we do have some familiar tropes, I think. You know, there's what I think seems to be setting up a love triangle. There's kind of like this dark prince stereotype. So like your mileage may vary based on how much you enjoy those sorts of tropes. You know, like I'm not super big on love triangles, so I don't love the direction that this is going in, but you know, like I could be wrong about that happening. It was really easy to read, but I think it was kind of lacking in some parts. There was like, you know, it starts off pretty fast paced, and then it kind of just, like, there's a middle section that kind of is a little bit slower. I'm still not really sure about how Ren's powers actually work, and I think there's you know, in general, there's a lot, I don't have the best sense of the world, and there are some dangling plot threads here. I did like that there was no insta-love in this book. That was excellent. I definitely predicted several things that happen in this book, which, like, you know, is kind of good and bad. It makes me feel smart for being able to predict these things, but I guess it's also nice to, like, kind of be kept on your toes sometimes. Ren, I think, was all right. I didn't fully connect with her, but, you know, I do feel bad for her because of her past. She doesn't really know who she is. It's kind of hard to pin down her personality, I think, so that made it a little bit harder to connect with her for me. So, yeah, I mean, like, I did enjoy this, and I'm somewhat interested in, you know, reading the second book whenever that comes out, but I don't know if it's, like, the highest priority for me. So now we get into a whole bunch of 4-star books. And the first one I will talk about here is The Devil in the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. So this is kind of like a historical mystery novel. It's set in 1634, and we have this detective who's being transported to Amsterdam to be executed for a crime that he may or may not have committed. His bodyguard is trying to prove him innocent, and we also have a noblewoman on board the ship with a secret. On their journey, there's like this mysterious symbol on a sail that appears, livestock starts dying off, we have this dead leper stalking the ship, and then we have whispers in the darkness. So basically it's like, is this a demon haunting this voyage? So I think that this was generally enjoyable, but I will say I didn't enjoy it as much as the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. I really liked this setting on the ship, though. I think it's kind of this closed circle murder mystery type vibe, which I love. I also really liked the hints of the supernatural. Overall, you know, I was interested throughout the book, though it did feel a little bit long at times, I think. It's really interesting to see how everything turns out to, like, you know, or how everything kind of connects at the end. I have mixed feelings about the ending. It's not exactly what I wanted, but I like this direction. The characters were generally interesting. I really liked Sarah, who is this noblewoman, and her daughter. Both are very intelligent, but they do have to deal with some kind of like heavier problems, I would say. We have this bodyguard guy who is very loyal, and you know, it's interesting to see kind of the dynamics between everybody. And just generally, there's some really interesting dynamics on the ship with, you know, the crew, the passengers, so it made for some interesting reading. It's really fun to see things unravel as this more like demonic stuff starts happening. It reminds me of like a Sherlock Holmes type vibe on a boat. So if that sounds interesting to you, I would definitely check this out. The next 4-star book I'll talk about is The Whisper Man by Alex North. So this is kind of like a thriller type book where we have Tom and his son Jake who moved to this new town after Tom's wife died. 20 years ago in this town, there was a serial killer known as the Whisper Man who lured his victims out by whispering at the windows. You know, now flash forward 20 years, the young boy vanishes, and Jake, the son, starts to hear whispering at his window, even though the Whisper Man is in prison. So, you know, I think for this, I actually really enjoyed it much more than I thought I would. So, you know, there's a lot of mixed reviews for this, and so I kind of like went in with really low expectations, and that probably helped me a bit, I think. You know, I think it's fast-paced, and I was definitely invested in the story throughout the book. I did guess the ending, but I liked having the clues kind of like scattered throughout the book. The Whisper Man concept in general was really creepy. I think in like this book is very much about the father-son relationships throughout. There's definitely several moments of fathers questioning if they're doing a good job as like being a parent. I wanted it to more lean into horror, I guess, but I did think it was really interesting to see how just everything played out. So, you know, if you're looking for a thriller type book and this general plot sounds interesting to you, I would recommend this, but I think again, going in with low expectations definitely helped me. The next 4-star book I'll talk about is Whiteout by Ashton Macaulay. So I received this review from the author. I had seen a Twitter exchange, and like this definitely like hits several things that I really enjoy. So I was like, ooh, tell me more about this. And then he like very kindly sent this to me for review. So this is, I'm not really sure what genre this falls into, like kind of horror, kind of urban fantasy, just like generally monster hunting. So we have our main character, Nick, who's kind of a drunk and doesn't really care for people, but he is one of the top monster hunters. So he goes to the Himalayas with his apprentice and a mountain guide, and they're basically in a race against this adversary to find Shangri-La, but they have to deal with Yetis along the way. So this was so much fun. Like I mentioned, this definitely hits like several things that I really enjoy. Like, I, for some reason, am very much interested in this, like, subgenre of sort of this, like, mountain climbing expedition sort of thing with supernatural and horror type elements. So this definitely, like, fulfilled that. And, you know, I will say, like, I could have used a little bit more of the Yeti throughout, but I do like what we had with it and some other creatures that appear. This is also structured as, like, a story within a story. So Nick is kind of recounting this adventure to this kind of nefarious guy, and I thought both aspects were quite interesting. There's definitely, like, something a little bit off about this guy that he's telling his story to. It's fun to see how, like, everything kind of ends up going. There's hints of other adventures mentioned in passing, and I really feel like there's just a ton of room for development with future books, and I would definitely read all of these adventures. Generally, I think it was fast-paced. There were maybe some moments where the plot kind of lulled a bit, you know, like, I think more towards the beginning this happened, but then it definitely, like, picked up. I really liked the incorporation of Shangri-La here. It is super cool. In terms of the characters, Nick I don't think is the most likable person, but, like, he does seem to kind of have a good heart kind of buried underneath there. He's very snarky, and I found him to be pretty amusing. He's definitely seen some shit, so he's kind of like this battle-hardened warrior type character, I think. The apprentice and this mountain guide are both really cool. They're obviously much nicer, and we have some interesting things that we learn about this mountain guide. So I would definitely read more, and in fact I will be reading more because the author has very kindly sent me Downpour, which is the sequel, and this just came out. But I think in that one he's going to be journeying into the Central American jungle in pursuit of the fabled land of the dead. So that sounds awesome, and I'm very excited to get to that. Alright, so I think the last of the 4-star books I'll talk about today is Monstre, Volume 1 by Duncan Swan. So the author very kindly sent this to me for review, and, you know, let's just admire the black sprayed edges. It's really awesome. So this is like an apocalyptic horror book where we have 2 timelines. We have Day 0, where this toxic smoke and ash kind of, like, blooms out in a cloud from a research facility in Switzerland. The Marines are sent in to investigate what happened and, like, try to figure out how to fix this. Then we also have this later timeline of Day 89 where this cloud is spreading and there's just a lot of chaos going on here. So we follow a Tennessee sheriff as he goes with his deputy to protect her family, and they're basically trying to track down rumors of this nuclear bunker. So I thought this was really enjoyable. It's definitely fast-paced, though I will say some sections it does vary up, like, the point of view characters, and some of these sections I didn't fully love as much just because I didn't really care for these particular characters. Like I mentioned, we do have these different people to follow, and there are several characters to keep track of, but generally I don't think it's super challenging to do that. I think this is really well written, especially as a first book. It's, you know, such a really cool idea of this cloud, and, you know, you learn more about the cloud and some things perhaps lurking within. It's very creepy and very well done, I think. There's definitely dark moments here, especially as humanity kind of, like, turns on itself in order to survive. There's lots of gore, there are things like suicide, rape, and murder, so do be aware of that. In terms of the timelines, I think I probably preferred this later timeline, but I do really enjoy seeing how this earlier timeline and seeing, like, how everything starts. It does end in a bit of a cliffhanger, though. Oh my god, I need volume 2. The characters, I think, from the second timeline, like the sheriff, are much more preferable to me in general. You can definitely feel the desperation of people and, you know, the desire to try anything in order to actually survive. The sheriff, I think, was pretty smart. He, like, preps as much as possible. I will say there are not a lot of strong female characters throughout the book, so that's, like, a little bit unfortunate, but in general, I really enjoyed my time with this, and I would keep reading this series. So now we get into the 5-star books, and the first one I'll talk about here is The Holo Places by T. Kingfisher. So this is a horror novel that takes place in North Carolina. We follow Kara as she helps her uncle at the Glory to God Museum of Natural Wonders, Curiosities, and Taxidermy. She one day discovers this mysterious hole in the drywall that leads to a new world, and this turns out to be a hub with portals to alternate realities. This is obviously full of danger, so we'll leave it at that, but I thought that this was a fantastic blend of humor and horror. I think, like I kind of mentioned this, I think in my October releases video, but I think in terms of the horror itself, this is more like abstract and larger scale horror than that of the Twisted ones, but I think in terms of the, like, story, I think the ending was better here than the ending of the Twisted ones. There's definitely some genuinely creepy scenes. Like, in particular, there's one on a bus that I was just like, oh my god, that's horrifying. I really loved this museum and all the strange things within it. I liked spending time in this creepy world and in the museum, but I guess like I could have used a little bit more time in the creepy world. But the museum was awesome. Like, I have like a strange fond spot in my heart for terrible taxidermy. So really loved that, you know, we have these like bizarre taxidermy things throughout the book. This book kept me interested throughout. It's pretty well paced, and I definitely flew through it. I liked both Kara and her friend Simon. Kara is kind of going through a really tough divorce, but she really comes into her own throughout the book. Both are very likable, and I enjoyed their friendship and just support of each other. I did predict what was going on, but I enjoyed seeing everything unravel. So, and like I said, I really enjoyed this ending. So if you're looking for a horror book with some hints of humor, I would definitely recommend this. Obviously, like, humor is a little bit subjective, but I thought it was really funny. The next 5-star book I'll talk about is The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. So this is also like a horror thriller book where we have two timelines. We are in upstate New York, and in 1982 we follow Viv as she works as a night clerk at this hotel, but something is a little bit off here. Then we also have this timeline in 2017 where Viv's niece goes to this town, Fell, to find out what happened to her aunt. Soon she finds herself ensnared in the same mysteries that claimed her aunt. So I thought this was really great, and there's definitely some creepy moments here. I really liked the use of dual timelines here. It's really fun to see what actually happened to Viv as Carly, this niece, investigates her aunt's disappearance. There's, you know, some true crime elements here that I thought were fantastic, and there's some, like, ghosts and generally, like, creepy stuff that happens, and I loved these. Both Carly and Viv I thought were fantastic. I can respect, you know, how they want to get out and actually live their lives. Both are intelligent and definitely driven to investigate these respective mysteries. There were some really interesting side characters in both timelines that help with our main characters' quests. In general, I think it's like a lot of women trying to just do their jobs. You know, there are some content warnings here for rape, murder, and suicidal thoughts. But in general, you know, like, I'm going to keep this kind of brief because it's just super fun to kind of like read it for yourself and experience everything. I've read The Broken Girls by her and enjoyed it. I definitely preferred this one. I think it's a bit creepier, especially at, you know, there's some alarming scenes at this hotel, or the motel. The next 5-star book I'll talk about is They Never Learn by Layne Fargo. So I received this for review from NetGalley, and this is a thriller where we have an English professor who kills the worst man at her university each year. So she's prepping for this year's murder when this investigation into the campus's body count starts. We also have a freshman at this university, and she's just really wanting to get through the year. And basically, she's kind of like trying to fly under the radar, but her roommate is much more out there. And so they form a really intense friendship, but one day her roommate is sexually assaulted at a party. So we'll just leave it at that. So I really don't want to spoil anything here. So I thought that this was so dark, but it was just like so irresistible. I really could not stop myself from reading this. It's very intense, and it's kind of weird to root for like this serial killer woman, but like I kind of did. There's some dark humor in here as well, which I really appreciated. I mentioned this also in my October releases video, but there's like some things that I really didn't expect, and perhaps I should have, but I didn't. I mentioned it in there, you know, like I actually physically shook my head in shock. I was like, what just happened? And I'm sure, like, some people will be able to guess this, but I went in having, like, an idea in my mind where this story was going to go, so it, like, I don't know, it just came as a bit of a shock. It's interesting to see this freshman Carly develop over the book. She starts off, like, being very withdrawn, but kind of comes into her own. And then our professor is very self-possessed and just kind of badass. We do have some LGBTQ plus representation here. Obviously, there's a lot of dark stuff here. You know, we have content warnings for murder, rape, attempted rape, I think maybe some suicidal thoughts, perhaps. I could be wrong on that. It's definitely like a really interesting take on taking justice into your own hands. So I would absolutely recommend this book. It was like, wow. It was so dark, so twisted, and so good. So if that sounds interesting to you, I think that this would be perfect to pick up. And finally, the last 5-star book I'll talk about today is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. So this is an adult fantasy that's inspired by pre-Columbian America. particularly this culture in the Southwest, which is awesome. Like, that's where I'm from. And I just like, I don't know, I just love her book so much because like in her Six World series, you know, there's like a lot of places that I know. This one's obviously like high fantasy and not so much like grounded in real world locations, but there's like this kind of cliff setting, and I can just like really picture it because there's like this particular type of dwelling out where I'm from, and so it's just like, I don't know, it's just so special. Anyway, I'm rambling. I have not told you the synopsis. So we'll get into that. So we have this holy city that is prepping for the winter solstice, and this year there is a solar eclipse. We also have a ship who's captained by a teak whose song calms the water and men's minds. And so she is carrying a passenger who is a young man who is blind and scarred. So that is basically the synopsis that's like, you know, on Goodreads or whatever. So we'll leave it at that because like I thought it was just so fun to kind of uncover the story as I went. Like I really had no idea what to expect going into this, and I just absolutely loved it. This setting, like I mentioned, is just fantastic. Like, it reminds me of these cliff dwellings at home that are just like, I mean, they're so high up, and it is just amazing that people, like, actually lived there. So, you know, getting hints of that throughout, like, I could really picture it, and it's just like, oh, it's just such a cool setting. I love it. In general, I think this story feels so fresh. The plot moves at a really good pace, I thought. You know, I was really drawn in throughout. We do have a variety of timelines here. We have, obviously, the current timeline, and then there are some past timelines that kind of explore some of the characters' backgrounds. The chapters do mention, like, what time it's at, but I have a, like, really nasty habit of not paying attention to, like, chapter names and headers, so sometimes I was like, I'm not sure which one this is, or which timeline this is, but you can, like, pretty easily figure it out. I really liked both of these settings in this holy city and on this ship. I think they're both super interesting, and it's like really hard to decide which one I preferred. It's definitely a dark fantasy. There's some violent rituals, betrayals, schemes, you know, there's content warnings here for abuse, suicide, and murder. All of the characters are fantastic here. We have this sun priest who is kind of like trying to better connect the people with these priests, and not everyone agrees with her. Then we also have this captain who's kind of exiled and reviled for like being a teak. And it's really cool to see her relationship form with this passenger. You know, they're both kind of friendless based on their background, but both become stronger for this relationship, I think. We have a lot of people in general from like a variety of backgrounds. Excellent representation here for, you know, there's a blind character, there's LGBTQ plus representation. Like, I think we have several non-binary characters here. There's a lot of people with some really cool abilities, and it's super cool to see how they use them all. So this was just amazing, and I absolutely can't wait to continue. We chose this as the Space Sirens book club pick to read, I think, in November and discuss in December. So if you want to read and discuss it with us, you know, you can definitely do that. So with that, those are the 10 books that I have to talk to you about today. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books or think you might pick them up. And for your question of the day, have you read any like horror or thriller type books that involve this like mountain climbing or general expeditions that have some sort of supernatural like horror elements? Because like I'm definitely on the lookout for more recommendations here. I read The White Road by Sarah Lotz. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I really liked that and would definitely recommend that if you're like in the kind of looking for this general subgenre. I asked on Twitter about this and did get some books to look into, but again, always on the lookout for more. Anyway, I do have a Discord channel, and if you want to join that, the link is in the description below. I hope you're all having an excellent day and are reading something awesome. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, as that would certainly help me out. But with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up here and see you in the next one.